The strongest man in the city wasn't the one who could stand. It was the one nobody could make kneel. I didn't know his name when I accepted the job. All I knew was that the pay was almost 3 times what any executive assistant position usually offered. The schedule included a private apartment for employees, and whoever wrote the listing had ended it with a sentence that sounded more like a warning than a benefit. Most applicants leave before sunset. I stared at those words on my phone while Ethan colored dinosaurs beside me at our tiny kitchen table. Rent was due in 6 days. My son's backpack zipper had finally broken that morning. The old sedan in our apartment parking lot needed brakes that squealed loud enough to embarrass me every school drop-off. I couldn't afford to wonder why people kept quitting. I only knew I couldn't afford to quit before I even started. The address led me far beyond downtown, past neighborhoods lined with maple trees and quiet sidewalks, until iron gates taller than a delivery truck slowly opened without anyone greeting me. The driveway stretched nearly a quarter mile, bordered by trimmed hedges and stone lanterns that looked older than my grandparents'. Every window of the mansion reflected the gray morning sky like polished mirrors. The place didn't feel abandoned. It felt watchful. A man in a charcoal suit met me at the entrance without introducing himself. His expression never changed as he held the front door open. "Miss Hannah Brooks?" he asked. I nodded. "You're the 38th assistant." He said it the way someone announces today's weather. Not proudly, not sadly, just as a fact. "How long did number 37 last?" I asked with a nervous smile. "For hours." He turned and walked inside before I could ask another question. Marble floors echoed beneath my shoes. Sunlight poured through enormous windows, yet the mansion somehow felt colder than the crisp October air outside. Every room looked perfectly arranged, untouched by ordinary life. Fresh flowers stood in crystal vases. Paintings covered the walls. Antique clocks ticked softly in the distance. Nothing seemed out of place except the silence. It wrapped around everything like another layer of architecture. We stopped outside a pair of heavy wooden doors. "Mr. Vincent Moretti prefers honesty," the man said quietly. "He dislikes pity. He dislikes excuses even more." Before I could answer, he opened the doors. The office overlooked a private lake glowing beneath pale morning light. Floor-to-ceiling shelves held thousands of books. A fireplace burned despite the mild weather. Near the windows sat a sleek wheelchair beside a polished oak desk. The man occupying it never looked up immediately. He continued reading a document while sunlight caught the intricate tattoos climbing above the collar of his black shirt, disappearing beneath the fabric before reappearing across both hands resting calmly on the armrests. More ink disappeared beneath tailored sleeves, hinting at artwork extending across his entire body. When he finally lifted his eyes, the room somehow became quieter. Vincent Moretti looked nothing like the stories whispered online. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't surrounded by chaos. His calm carried more weight than anger ever could. His blue eyes studied me the same way an experienced architect studies a blueprint, searching for flaws before construction begins. "You have a child," he said. It wasn't a question. My heartbeat stumbled. "Yes. 8 years old." Another statement. "His name is Ethan." I swallowed carefully. "Yes." He placed the folder aside. "You're wondering how I know." I didn't answer because the truth was obvious. Someone who lived inside a world built on information probably knew more about me than I knew about myself. He leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. "Everyone arrives believing they're different." His voice stayed low and steady. "Everyone leaves convinced they were wrong." I met his eyes without realizing I was doing it. Maybe they left because nobody ever stayed long enough to learn who you really are. For the first time, something changed in his expression. It wasn't surprise exactly. More like curiosity that had been asleep for a very long time. The silence between us stretched until I wondered whether I'd already ruined the best opportunity my family had ever been given. Then he reached toward a small silver bell resting on his desk and slid it across the polished wood until it stopped inches from my hand. "Ring it," he said. "If you decide to quit, ring it once. Someone will escort you out immediately. No explanations required." I looked at the bell, then back at him. "And if I don't?" A faint smile almost appeared before disappearing again. "Then tomorrow," he said quietly, "you'll become the first assistant to walk through that door twice." I did not touch the silver bell. Instead, I slipped it into the top drawer of the desk exactly where Vincent had left it, and I looked around the office as though it were any other workplace. He watched every movement without saying another word. The silence between us felt deliberate, almost like another employee assigned to test my patience. After several long seconds, I picked up a legal pad resting beside the computer and asked the first practical question that came to mind. What time do you usually start your mornings? His eyebrows lifted just enough to notice. You are asking about my schedule? That is why I am here. Another pause followed. 6:30. I wrote it down. Coffee. Black. I wrote again. Breakfast preferences? Simple. Favorite newspaper? Digital edition. Physical therapy appointments? This time he looked directly into my eyes. Wednesday and Friday. I continued filling the page while he studied me with quiet suspicion. Most people probably entered this room trying to fix him, impress him, or comfort him. I was simply trying to learn my job. By 8 o'clock, I had memorized the layout of the office, organized the morning correspondence, answered 3 phone calls from executives who immediately sounded surprised that someone had actually answered, and created a calendar that looked more like the command center of a global corporation than the schedule of one man. Every hour contained meetings, financial reviews, charitable foundation updates, and private consultations. Whatever business Vincent managed, it clearly reached far beyond the walls of this estate. Around noon, an older woman carrying fresh towels stopped outside the office door. She smiled warmly at me before lowering her voice. You are still here. Apparently. She laughed softly. That already makes you special. Her name was Margaret. She had worked in the mansion for almost 20 years and seemed to know every hallway, every employee, and every hidden routine. While she folded fresh blankets in a nearby sitting room, she quietly shared one important piece of advice. Do not confuse Mr. Moretti's distance with cruelty. He simply stopped expecting people to stay. Before I could ask what she meant, Vincent rolled into the room. Margaret immediately returned to her work without another word. He glanced at the folders I had arranged into neat stacks. You reorganized everything. It was difficult to find priorities. I never asked you to. You also never asked me not to. For the first time that day, the corner of his mouth almost formed a smile before disappearing again. The afternoon passed with remarkable calm until my phone vibrated. Ethan's school nurse. My heart immediately tightened. I stepped into the hallway before answering. Thankfully, it was nothing serious. Ethan had forgotten his inhaler after gym class and needed me to bring it before tomorrow morning. Relief washed through me so quickly I had to lean against the wall for a second. When I returned, Vincent had already noticed the change in my expression. Your son? He asked quietly. I nodded. He is fine. Just forgetful. Vincent turned his chair toward the lake outside the window. Children should be allowed to forget things. His voice carried something softer than before. Adults rarely receive the same luxury. The sentence lingered with me long after he returned to reading reports. Later that afternoon, I found an untouched lunch still sitting on the side table exactly where the chef had placed it. You skipped lunch, I said. I was busy. You have been busy since sunrise. That changes nothing. I crossed my arms. Actually, it changes everything. He looked up slowly. Excuse me. You hired an assistant. Part of my job is making sure you do not ignore basic routines while everyone else depends on your decisions. The room became perfectly still. Somewhere downstairs, a grandfather clock chimed 4 times. Vincent held my gaze long enough that I wondered if I had finally crossed the invisible line every former assistant had discovered. Then, without another word, he reached for the tray, picked up the bowl of soup, and took one quiet spoonful. I smiled before I could stop myself. There. That was not so difficult. He shook his head almost imperceptibly. You are unusually stubborn, Ms. Brooks. I have an 8-year-old son. Stubborn is a survival skill. For just a heartbeat, something changed in the atmosphere of the room. The mansion no longer felt quite as cold. The silence remained, but it was no longer empty. It felt as though 2 strangers had quietly agreed to stop treating each other like obstacles and start behaving like human beings. When evening settled over the lake and golden light filled the office, my eyes drifted toward the desk drawer where the silver bell still rested untouched. I realized I had forgotten it was even there, and somehow, I had the feeling Vincent had noticed that too. The next morning, I arrived 15 minutes before 6:30, carrying a paper bag that smelled faintly of cinnamon and fresh coffee. The kitchen staff looked surprised to see me already there, but nobody asked questions. I poured Vincent's black coffee into the same porcelain mug he had used the day before and placed it neatly beside his desk before he entered the office. When the elevator doors opened, he stopped for the smallest fraction of a second. His eyes moved from the organized desk to the steaming cup waiting exactly where he would reach for it. "You remembered," he said. "That is part of the job," I answered. He took one sip without another comment, but I noticed he finished the entire cup before 8 o'clock. The morning unfolded with its familiar rhythm of meetings, financial reports, and quiet conversations that never seemed loud enough to disturb the peaceful atmosphere of the estate. Everyone treated Vincent with remarkable respect, yet nobody lingered longer than necessary. They completed their work efficiently, wished him a good day, and disappeared. It was not fear that I sensed. It was distance. The mansion functioned like a perfectly tuned clock whose gears never questioned each other. During a short break, Margaret found me arranging documents in the library. "You are settling in faster than anyone expected," she whispered. "He has not raised his voice once." I smiled. "Maybe he does not need to." Margaret's expression softened. "Before the accident, this house was always full of guests, laughter, and music. Now it is mostly quiet. Sometimes silence can become heavier than any burden." Her words stayed with me as I returned to the office. Through the open doors, I saw Vincent staring across the lake instead of reading the reports stacked beside him. Morning sunlight shimmered across the water while a pair of ducks drifted slowly past the dock. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked, "Do you ever go outside?" He answered without turning around. "Not often." "Because you do not want to?" Another pause followed. "Because it became easier to stay inside." I walked toward the windows and looked across the same peaceful view. "My son says fresh air solves at least half of life's problems." Vincent almost smiled again. "Your son sounds optimistic." "He has to be. He learned early that worrying never paid the electric bill." That earned a quiet chuckle so brief I almost thought I imagined it. The sound changed the room more than any decoration could have. It reminded me there was still a man beneath the reputation, beneath the wealth, beneath the silence. Shortly before lunch, my phone buzzed with a message from Ethan's teacher. His class was organizing a family reading afternoon later that week. Parents were invited to spend an hour reading with their children. I caught myself smiling at the screen. Vincent noticed immediately. "Good news?" he asked. "The best kind. My son wants me to read his favorite adventure book to his class." He nodded slowly. "Do not miss it." "I will not." He looked down at the report in front of him before speaking again. "Children remember who showed up." The sentence carried a quiet certainty that felt deeply personal. I wanted to ask why, but instinct told me not every question deserved an immediate answer. Instead, I handed him the afternoon schedule and reminded him about his physical therapy appointment on Wednesday. He glanced at the calendar, then back at me. "You plan further ahead than the others." "I plan because I intend to be here next week." His eyes remained fixed on mine for several seconds. There was no challenge in his expression anymore, only thoughtful curiosity. As the afternoon light stretched across the polished wooden floor, I realized something important had changed. I was no longer counting the hours until I could leave. And for the first time in a very long while, Vincent Moretti no longer looked like a man waiting for someone else to walk away. Wednesday arrived with clear skies and cool autumn air drifting across the lake outside the mansion. The sunlight reflected off the water so brightly that the office no longer felt quite as heavy as it had on my first morning. I had already memorized Vincent's routine well enough to prepare everything before he asked. His calendar was organized, his correspondence sorted by priority, and his favorite black coffee rested on the corner of the desk exactly as the clock reached 6:30. He noticed every detail without commenting on most of them, but I was beginning to understand that silence was often his way of saying thank you. Mid-morning, his physical therapist arrived carrying a slim leather folder instead of the thick medical case I had expected. The session was calm and professional, focused on stretching, breathing, posture, and determination rather than dramatic breakthroughs. I quietly worked from the adjoining office while respecting his privacy, yet I could not help noticing how disciplined Vincent remained. Every movement demanded patience. Every exercise required concentration. He never complained, never searched for sympathy, and never blamed anyone for the reality he faced. When the therapist finally left, she paused beside me in the hallway. "He works harder than almost anyone I have treated," she said softly. Sometimes progress is measured in inches instead of miles. After she departed, I returned with a fresh glass of water. Vincent looked tired for the first time since I had met him. His shoulders rested against the chair, and the determined confidence in his eyes had been replaced by quiet exhaustion. Long morning, I asked gently. He released a slow breath. Productive mornings are usually the longest. I handed him the water. Then today was successful. He accepted the glass and studied me over its rim. You always find a better way to describe things. I smiled. Years of raising an optimistic 8-year-old. That afternoon my phone buzzed with another message from Ethan. His teacher had sent a photo of him proudly holding a handmade bookmark he wanted to use during the family reading event. His smile filled the screen so completely that I laughed before I realized Vincent was watching. "May I see?" he asked. Without hesitation, I handed him the phone. He looked at the picture for several quiet seconds before returning it with unexpected care. "He looks happy." "He usually is." I slipped the phone back into my pocket. "He believes every problem has a solution if you are willing to keep looking." Vincent turned toward the window where a gentle breeze stirred the colorful leaves along the shoreline. He is fortunate to have someone who taught him that. His words settled deeper than he probably intended. Nobody had ever complimented my parenting so simply or sincerely. Later that afternoon, an unexpected delivery arrived at the front entrance. It was a large box filled with children's books addressed to the estate library. Margaret explained they had been donated to one of Vincent's educational charities. I carried the box into the library, planning to organize the shelves before leaving for the evening. A few minutes later, I heard the quiet sound of his wheelchair approaching across the polished floor. He stopped beside one of the empty shelves and reached toward a book with a colorful cover showing a lighthouse beside the ocean. "This was my favorite when I was a boy," he said almost absent-mindedly. It was the first time he had voluntarily shared anything about his childhood. I looked at the worn cover before placing it carefully on the middle shelf. "Would you recommend it to Ethan?" He nodded once. "It reminds children that courage is often quiet." I smiled. "That sounds like something both of you would enjoy." For a brief moment, he did not answer. Instead, he looked around the library filled with stories waiting to be opened. The afternoon sunlight poured through the tall windows, covering the wooden floor with warm golden light. The room felt less like part of a mansion and more like a home. As I gathered my bag to leave, Vincent spoke without looking away from the shelves. "Do not forget your son's reading afternoon tomorrow." I blinked in surprise. "You remembered." He finally looked at me with the faintest trace of a smile. "You told me it mattered. Important things deserve to be remembered." Walking toward the front entrance that evening, I realized something had quietly changed between us. I had arrived believing I was helping a man organize his schedule. Instead, little by little, two strangers were beginning to restore small pieces of each other's lives without either of us fully realizing it. The following afternoon, I left the estate an hour earlier than usual because nothing in my calendar mattered more than Ethan's reading event. The elementary school library smelled like old paper, sharpened pencils, and fresh popcorn from a fundraiser in the hallway. Children rushed between colorful shelves carrying picture books almost as large as their backpacks, while parents filled tiny chairs that seemed built for anyone under 4 feet tall. Ethan spotted me before I reached the doorway. His face lit up so brightly that every difficult morning, every overdue bill, and every long drive suddenly felt worthwhile. He wrapped his arms around me with the complete confidence that only children possess. "I knew you would come," he whispered. "I promised," I answered, brushing a hand through his hair. We spent the next hour reading a story about a lighthouse keeper who never abandoned his post during storms. Ethan insisted on reading every other page aloud, carefully sounding out difficult words before looking up to make sure I was still listening. I was. Every single word. When the event ended, his teacher thanked the parents for making time despite busy schedules. Driving home, Ethan talked nonstop about his classmates, the bookmarks they had traded, and how one boy wanted to become an astronaut while another planned to build video games. Then he asked a question I had not expected. "Mom, is your new boss still sad?" I glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "Why would you ask that?" He shrugged. "You smile more now, but sometimes when people smile more, it is because they are trying to help someone who forgot how." Children notice things adults often missed. That evening, after dropping Ethan at my sister's house for the night, I returned to the estate to prepare documents for the next morning's meeting. The mansion was unusually quiet. Margaret was arranging fresh flowers near the grand staircase when she greeted me with a warm smile. "Mr. Moretti is in the library," she said softly. "He has been there since dinner." I found Vincent exactly where she had said, sitting beside the large windows overlooking the dark lake. A single lamp illuminated the open book resting across his lap, although it looked as though he had not turned a page in quite some time. "I hope I am not interrupting," I said. He looked up. "How was the reading afternoon?" I smiled before answering. "Perfect." Ethan corrected my pronunciation of a pirate's name in front of 20 people. Vincent's quiet laugh echoed gently through the library. "That sounds like something an honest child would do." I handed him the folder containing tomorrow's schedule before taking a seat across from him. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Rain began tapping softly against the tall windows, turning the lake into a field of tiny silver ripples. Finally, Vincent broke the silence. "My mother used to read to me every Sunday evening." His voice remained calm, but there was a softness I had never heard before. "She believed stories taught people how to survive before life tested them." I listened without interrupting. "After she passed away," he continued, "I stopped opening novels for many years. Business became easier than memories." His fingers rested lightly on the worn cover of the book in his lap. Today I remembered what it felt like to miss that tradition. I looked toward the rain beyond the glass before speaking. "It is never too late to begin another tradition." He considered the thought carefully. "Perhaps." I smiled. "Ethan would probably recommend starting with the lighthouse story." Vincent nodded slowly. "Perhaps I should ask him for a recommendation instead of pretending I already know the best one." The conversation drifted naturally after that, touching on favorite childhood books, small-town libraries, autumn weather, and simple moments that neither of us had discussed before. There were no walls of silence between us that evening, only two people discovering that ordinary conversations sometimes carried extraordinary comfort. As I stood to leave, Vincent looked toward the rain once more before quietly saying, "Thank you for keeping your promise to your son." I paused near the doorway. "Thank you for remembering that I made one." Walking through the quiet halls toward the front entrance, I realized the mansion no longer felt like a place built only from stone, polished wood, and old secrets. Little by little, it was beginning to sound like a home again, and for the first time since I had accepted the job, I found myself looking forward to tomorrow instead of simply hoping to make it through the day. The following week settled into a rhythm that almost felt ordinary, and that surprised me more than anything else. Every morning, I drove through the iron gates before sunrise. Every afternoon, I left with another page of notes for the next day, and every evening I realized I had stopped watching the clock. The mansion no longer felt intimidating. It felt familiar. Even the quiet had changed. It no longer pressed against the walls like a heavy fog. Instead, it carried the peaceful sound of pages turning in the library, distant conversations among the staff, and the gentle breeze drifting across the lake beyond Vincent's office windows. On Monday morning, I found a small package waiting on my desk with no card attached. Inside was a brand new copy of the lighthouse story Ethan and I had read together at school. I smiled before carrying it into Vincent's office. "Did you order this?" I asked. He looked up from his laptop without pretending to be surprised. "Perhaps." I turned the book over in my hands. "You said you had not read it in years. I thought your son deserved a copy that belonged to him." My throat tightened unexpectedly. "You did not have to do that." "No," he replied quietly. "I wanted to." That evening, I handed the book to Ethan after dinner. He ran his fingers across the colorful cover before opening the first page. Tucked inside was a simple bookmark with a watercolor painting of a lighthouse beside a calm ocean. There was no signature, only a handwritten sentence. "Never stop looking for the light." Ethan read the words twice before looking up at me. "Your boss wrote this, did he not?" I smiled. "I think he did." Ethan hugged the book against his chest. "Can I thank him someday?" I nodded. "If the time is right." The opportunity came sooner than either of us expected. 2 days later, Ethan's after-school program closed unexpectedly because of a maintenance issue, and my sister called to apologize because she was stuck at work. I stared at my phone, then at the packed afternoon schedule covering Vincent's desk. Before I could decide what to do, he noticed the concern on my face. "What happened?" he asked. I explained the situation as briefly as possible. "I can reschedule a few appointments and leave early if necessary." He remained thoughtful for a moment before speaking. "Bring Ethan here." I blinked. Are you sure? The library has more children's books than some schools. I hesitated. I do not want to inconvenience anyone. Vincent answered with unusual certainty. You will not. Less than an hour later, Ethan stepped cautiously through the front doors holding his backpack with both hands. His eyes grew wide as he looked around the enormous entrance hall with its marble floors and towering staircase. This place is bigger than my whole school, he whispered. Margaret greeted him with warm cookies fresh from the kitchen, and within minutes he was smiling at everyone he met. When I finally brought him into the office, Vincent set aside the financial report he had been reviewing. Ethan walked forward with surprising confidence and held up the Lighthouse book. Thank you for this, he said sincerely. It is my favorite now. Vincent accepted the gratitude with a gentle nod. I am glad it found the right reader. Ethan looked toward the shelves lining the office walls. Do you really read all of those? Vincent glanced around the room before answering. Not yet. Ethan grinned. Then we both still have work to do. I laughed softly, expecting Vincent to return to business immediately, but instead he reached toward one of the shelves and selected an illustrated adventure novel. Would you help me decide if this one belongs in the library downstairs? Ethan eagerly accepted the challenge. For the next 30 minutes, they sat beside the windows overlooking the lake, discussing favorite characters, impossible inventions, and stories that made ordinary people discover unexpected courage. I quietly finished organizing correspondence at the desk while pretending not to listen, but every few minutes I caught Vincent smiling in a way I had never seen before. It was relaxed, genuine, and entirely unguarded. Watching the two of them together, I realized something extraordinary was happening without anyone planning it. Ethan was not impressed by Vincent's wealth, the estate, or the reputation that followed his name. He simply saw a thoughtful man who loved good books. And Vincent, for the first time since I had met him, was no longer speaking like someone carrying the weight of yesterday. He sounded like a man beginning to believe tomorrow might still hold something worth waiting for. The days after Ethan's visit carried a different kind of energy through the estate. The staff still moved with quiet professionalism, but smiles appeared more often in passing conversations, and even the long hallways seemed less intimidating. I noticed Vincent spending more time in the library than before, occasionally leaving a novel open on his desk between financial reports instead of closing it the moment business resumed. One crisp Friday morning, the lake outside reflected a cloudless blue sky, and sunlight filled the office with a warmth that autumn rarely offered. I had just finished reviewing the schedule when the intercom buzzed. A board meeting involving executives from several charitable foundations was beginning in 10 minutes. Vincent adjusted the cuff of his black shirt, revealing the intricate tattoos extending across his wrist before disappearing beneath the sleeve. He looked composed, calm, and completely focused. If someone had walked into the room without knowing his circumstances, they would have noticed only the quiet authority that surrounded him. As the video conference began, faces from across the country appeared on the large display. Men and women greeted Vincent respectfully, waiting for him to open the discussion. He did not raise his voice. He did not rush a single sentence. Instead, he listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and guided every conversation with remarkable clarity. I watched from the side of the room, taking notes as one complicated issue after another found simple, practical solutions through his leadership. It became obvious why so many accomplished people trusted his judgment. His influence did not come from intimidation. It came from preparation, discipline, and the confidence to remain calm while everyone else searched for answers. Nearly 2 hours later, the final participant signed off with sincere appreciation. The room fell silent once more. I closed my notebook and looked at Vincent with genuine admiration. You solved every disagreement without anyone leaving frustrated, I said. He smiled faintly. People usually want the same destination. They only disagree about the road. I leaned back in my chair. You make it sound simple. Simple and easy are rarely the same thing. His words stayed with me throughout the afternoon. Later that day, I stopped by Ethan's school to pick him up. The moment he climbed into the car, he excitedly held up a drawing he had made in art class. It showed a large stone house beside a lake with 3 small figures standing beneath colorful trees. One of them sat in a wheelchair. Another held a stack of books. The smallest figure carried a backpack almost as large as himself. Is that us? I asked with a smile. Ethan nodded proudly. Everybody needs a team. I looked at the drawing for another moment before placing it carefully on the passenger seat. "Can I bring this to work on Monday?" he asked. "I think someone there might like it." Monday morning arrived with cool air and bright sunshine. After organizing the office, I placed Ethan's drawing inside a simple frame I had purchased over the weekend. When Vincent entered, his eyes immediately settled on the picture resting beside the bookshelf. He rolled closer and studied every detail without speaking. The lake, the trees, the books, and the three smiling figures had all been drawn with the uncomplicated honesty only a child could capture. "He gave you more hair than I remember," I joked softly. Vincent laughed, a genuine laugh that echoed through the office and lingered longer than either of us expected. "Children are generous artists," he replied. He remained quietly focused on the drawing before saying, "May I keep this here?" "He was hoping you would." Vincent carefully lifted the frame and placed it on the bookshelf beside the Lighthouse novel. The colorful picture stood out among polished wood, leather-bound volumes, and carefully arranged awards. Somehow it became the most valuable object in the room. Standing there, I realized leadership was not measured only by business decisions or professional achievements. Sometimes the strongest people inspired confidence simply by creating space where others felt safe enough to hope again. Looking at the drawing, Vincent seemed less like a man defined by everything life had taken from him and more like someone discovering that the future could still offer unexpected gifts. One quiet day, one honest conversation, and one small act of kindness at a time. Autumn settled gently over the estate, painting the trees in shades of amber and gold that shimmered across the lake each morning. I had lived enough difficult years to know peace rarely announced itself. It arrived quietly, disguised as ordinary routines that slowly became precious. Vincent's schedule remained demanding, yet he no longer filled every empty minute with work. Sometimes I found him reading in the library before sunrise. Other times he asked whether Ethan had discovered a new favorite book or how his spelling test had gone. They were small questions, but they carried genuine interest. One Thursday afternoon, I arrived with a folded envelope tucked inside my notebook. The local community center had offered me a full-time administrative position closer to home. The salary was respectable, the commute was shorter, and the hours would allow me to spend every afternoon with Ethan. For most people, the decision would have been easy. I placed the letter inside my desk drawer without mentioning it, hoping another day would somehow provide the answer. Unfortunately, silence has a way of attracting Vincent's attention. Before lunch, he noticed I had organized the same folder 3 different times. "Something is distracting you," he said. I tried to smile. "Just thinking." He waited. I had learned he never rushed honesty. Finally, I handed him the envelope. He read the offer carefully before placing it back on the desk. "It is a good opportunity," he said. "It is. Closer to your son." "Yes." The room fell quiet except for the soft ticking of the antique clock above the fireplace. I looked toward the lake because meeting his eyes suddenly felt much harder than I expected. "I have always promised Ethan that he would come first," I whispered. "You should keep that promise." His answer came immediately, without hesitation or disappointment in his voice. That somehow made it even harder. "You are not going to ask me to stay?" I asked. Vincent looked out across the water where a pair of swans drifted peacefully near the shore. People who truly care about someone do not make important decisions more difficult for them. I lowered my gaze to my hands. I had expected arguments, negotiations, perhaps even one of his calm speeches about loyalty. Instead, he had chosen kindness. The realization left an unexpected ache in my chest. That evening, after I picked Ethan up from school, we stopped for ice cream at a small family-owned shop near the park. While he concentrated on keeping chocolate syrup off his jacket, I told him about the job offer. He listened with surprising seriousness for an 8-year-old. "Will you be happier?" he asked. "I do not know." He nodded slowly, thinking much longer than most adults would have. "When I had to choose between 2 library books last week, Mrs. Dawson told me something." I smiled. "What was that?" He licked a small drop of melting ice cream from the corner of his cone before answering. "She said the best choice is usually the one you would still be proud of next year." His words stayed with me long after he had fallen asleep that night. The following morning, I returned to the estate carrying the unsigned employment letter. Everything looked exactly the same. The marble floors reflected the morning sun. Margaret arranged fresh flowers in the entrance hall. The scent of coffee drifted through the corridors. Yet I noticed one detail that had somehow escaped me before. The staff laughed more easily now. The house no longer felt like a museum preserved in silence. It felt alive. When I entered the office, Vincent was looking at Ethan's framed drawing resting beside the bookshelf. He did not hear me immediately. He gave this place something I thought it had forgotten, he said quietly. What is that? I asked. He turned toward me with a gentle expression that no longer carried the guarded distance of the man I had first met. The feeling that tomorrow is worth preparing for. I looked at the unsigned letter still resting inside my notebook and realized my decision had never really been about choosing between two jobs. It was about understanding where hope had quietly taken root. Sometimes the place that changes your life is not the one that asks you to stay. It is the one that reminds you that your presence already matters. The next morning I arrived at the estate before sunrise with the unsigned offer letter still resting inside my notebook. The air carried the crisp scent of late autumn, and a gentle layer of mist floated above the lake like a soft blanket waiting for the first light of day. As I walked through the front doors, Margaret greeted me with the same warm smile she had offered on my first morning. Only this time her eyes seemed to hold quiet confidence instead of curiosity. "Good morning, Hannah," she said. "Good morning," I answered, realizing that for the first time in many years, those simple words felt completely sincere. I walked into Vincent's office to find him already reviewing the day's schedule. The framed drawing Ethan had made still occupied the most visible place on the bookshelf, beside the lighthouse novel that had unexpectedly connected 3 different lives. Vincent looked up as I entered. "You made a decision," he said calmly. I smiled. "How did you know?" He nodded toward my notebook. "You are carrying it differently." I laughed softly before removing the envelope and placing it on his desk. He looked at it, but did not reach for it. Instead, he waited. Slowly, I opened the envelope, removed the offer letter, folded it once, then placed it back inside. "I called them this morning," I said. "I thanked them for believing in me, but I declined." Vincent remained silent for a moment. "May I ask why?" I looked through the tall windows where the first rays of sunlight finally touched the surface of the lake. "Because I realized I was not searching for a shorter drive. I was searching for a place where my work meant something." He lowered his eyes briefly before speaking. "And you found that here?" "Yes." His expression softened with a quiet gratitude that needed no dramatic words. "Then I hope this place continues earning that trust every single day." A few days later, Ethan visited the estate again after school. This time he walked through the front entrance as though he had known it his entire life. He greeted Margaret with an enthusiastic hug, thanked the chef for the warm cookies waiting in the kitchen, and hurried straight toward the library carrying another drawing tucked beneath his arm. "I made something new," he announced proudly. Vincent welcomed him with the familiar smile that had become increasingly natural over the past several weeks. Ethan carefully unfolded the picture across the reading table. It showed the same lake, the same mansion, and the same 3 people, but there was one important difference. Above them he had drawn dozens of colorful autumn leaves swirling through bright blue skies. At the top of the page he had written in large, uneven letters, "Home is where people remember you." The room became wonderfully quiet. Vincent studied the drawing for several long seconds before looking at Ethan. "May I frame this one too?" Ethan grinned. "Only if you promise not to hide it in a drawer." Vincent laughed. "I promise." Later that afternoon, as golden sunlight filled the library, Vincent turned toward me. "There is something I have been meaning to tell you." I waited patiently. "When you first arrived, I believed you would leave like everyone else. I had already accepted that possibility before you even walked through the door." He paused before continuing. "You never tried to change who I was. You simply reminded me that life could still move forward." My eyes filled with unexpected tears, but they were the kind born from gratitude rather than sadness. "You reminded me of something too," I answered quietly. "That strength is not measured by how much someone can carry alone. Sometimes it is measured by allowing other people to walk beside you." We stood together in comfortable silence while Ethan sat nearby reading his lighthouse book with complete concentration. Outside, the wind carried another wave of golden leaves across the water, each one drifting toward the shore before finding a peaceful place to rest. Looking at the 2 people who had quietly become part of my everyday life, I finally understood something that had taken years to learn. The greatest turning points rarely arrive with loud celebrations or dramatic moments. More often, they begin with a single choice to stay one more day, one honest conversation, one unexpected act of kindness, and one small promise kept. Some people spend their entire lives searching for a miracle, only to discover that the miracle had been quietly waiting inside ordinary moments all along.